Hey, this is Michael Lindsay from Vital MX, and we just wrapped up our 2022 250 Shootout. We're here to do our roundtable. We got 4 of our 6 test riders, myself and Sean Klinger, who are on staff at Vital MX, Chris Siebenhaar and Willie Simons, who help us out with a lot of these tests. They spent all the days of this shootout with us. We all have our individual notes, our opinions. We have our overall score, and we're going to basically break down each bike based on how they finished and see where we agree, where we disagree, because that's part of it. Ultimately, a shootout is a subjective opinion. There's not really a right or a wrong answer at the end of the day. It's just kind of what we think based on our experience and our thoughts, and that's what we're here to share with you. So there's going to be one of these videos on each motorcycle. Make sure you check out all of them if you're really interested in finding out which bike is best for you this year. The Honda CRF250R, the only, per se, all new bike in the test. Everything else was a known quantity for all of us. This was the biggest question mark coming in, especially hearing the initial comments on the development. Us all right, for like say Meerschaum wrote it before this, is we knew that they really changed the character of the bike, which is huge. Everybody else is, like with the Austrians we talk about, or Yamaha has just been slowly like developing the character of their motorcycle, where Honda decided this year to just throw it all out the window and go a different direction. So it's interesting to see how everybody's going to respond to that. For me personally, I will say I was a little shocked as I ended up placing it second. And the reason is I like that the bike has an identity or character in a way. It does some things really, really well, and there's a few things it doesn't do as well. And for my riding style, what I want out of a bike, the things it did well supported things I'm bad at. So it makes me a better, I would say of a lot of the bikes, it actually supports me and makes me a better rider, where some bikes do things well that I'm already pretty good at, so I don't get that much out of it. So like I said, it's polar opposite almost of their last bike. The last motor was a straight screamer. It had very little low-end torque character, very little recovery, but the harder you rode it, the more rewarding it was. I remember a couple years ago in Shootout on that generation bike, I did a bunch of Lit Pro, and I found that almost every person set their best lap time on the old bike, but their average was horrible on it. It was all over the place because the bike was like, if you nailed your marks, great. If you didn't, everything's out the window. Lap goes to hell. The new bike, though, for me is totally opposite. It's a lot of low to mid character, really good torque, really good roll and feel. Not very rewarding up top. It goes fairly flat, and I think the dyno charts reflect it's down on peak horsepower from last year's bike. Negative, however, though, is still a little bit more, one of the more rigid chassis. There's definitely a little bit more feedback there. I think they did a pretty decent job with the suspension overall this year. I was 107 mil sag. Not quite flush on the fork. I was in between. Stock is like 5 mil. I think I went to 2 mil just to calm it down because the bike already steers so well for me. But I think what really draws the bike back a lot is everything else in the class has moved so far upstream mid to top power, which the Honda just left, but they didn't retain enough of that character to really make that motor feel complete at times. And like I said, if I rode it how it wanted to be ridden, great. If I tried to ride in a different way like the others, not so great.
No, 100%. And I got to ride the bike at the intro, so I came in kind of already knowing the platform and, obviously wheel-to-wheel revisions, and they shortened the rake up on the frame, and it definitely is more rigid than last year's bike. But what's wild to me is with all the weight saving that they saved and it being more rigid, what I liked about last year's bike, regardless that it was one of the slower models, was you could really almost override the Honda and kind of put it wherever you want, where you felt like you were in control. And that's what I like, especially end of the day if you're tired. And I always enjoyed that with last year's model and obviously previous. But I really wanted to rank the Honda right on the podium for myself, but it finished just outside. And part of that was just power. It is much, much faster than last year's model. But it's still lacking, like you said, that top end. And from a shootout standpoint and all their OEM platforms, that's the only downgrade for me, is that it is much faster. It's a huge improvement. Big year for Honda on the 250. It's a huge step in the right direction. Still an awesome bike to ride. The new show of suspension that they have on that model is way better for me. It's a couple clicks here and there, trying to get the forks to be less busy, get them to settle, and it was no-brainer.
KTM, Husky, gas gases, air fork bikes are very light on the front. And when we wait by us, it's shocking how light the KTM is on the front, because air fork's worth 3 pounds negative. You take that off, plus just the way KTM builds their bikes. Like I said, those bikes are really light on the front. The Yamaha somewhere in the middle. The Honda has historically been one of the heavier bikes on the front. For me, it adds a very planted feel. We're talking about like the KTM Gas Huskies have really sharp turning character, but sometimes I feel like the fronts on them wander a little bit on corner entry. Not bad, not that they're washing or anything, but I just don't feel as planned. When I step on the Honda, it's kind of things. If I see a line go in a corner, I just turn the bars. I'm like, oh, it's gonna go that way. Like to me, they feel very, very planted on the front.
Yeah, for me, I ranked the Honda 5th, and I really didn't want to. I wish I could rank it higher, because especially when I rode it first by itself, it works. Like, I liked everything about it. It wasn't doing anything wrong. But when you ride it in the Shootout, for me this year, it was, I mean, obviously all new, but like the Yamaha was more exciting in the motor department for me. Suspension wise, I got a little bit more comfort from some of the other bikes, and they were a little bit easier to set up. And then like handling wise, it turns great, but some of the other bikes also turn great. And then the light feel I love, and being really neutral, kind of that classic Honda feel that you're just comfortable on the bike. But it for me this year was in this vanilla zone, that it was just kind of like it did everything good, and I would be super pumped to ride it all year. But when you're comparing it back to back with other bikes, I'm like, you know, someone does something a little better in a lot of the different categories.
So same for me, ended up 5th on my list. I struggled most with mapping on the bike. So map 1, which is its standard map, it was a little bit softer on the bottom, but it pulled cleaner up top. Map 3 hit harder on the bottom, but then it just tapered off up top. As far as the chassis, I actually would never have guessed that it was more rigid. The overall bike did feel more comfortable to me compared to last year. Last year's bike seemed like it kind of kicked you around a lot. So again, a few little things. I didn't want to put it 5th. New bike, you're always kind of exciting and you want to see them do good, but there's just a few other things that it did that other bikes didn't do.
Yeah, and I mean, me putting it in 5th, one of the things was I had to go a lot stiffer on the fork. I don't know what direction you guys went, but I was trying to basically, like the initial part of the fork for me felt like too soft, and then I was in like a harsher area in the stroke, and then adding compression kept me out of it, but I was losing comfort. So it's like that weird balance.
I went faster on rebound.
Yeah, we did that too.
Yeah, I would say that's mostly I focus on. Same thing. Like, I feel like that Showa fork's really sensitive on clicker changes. Like, a one-click change is pretty big, so it's hard to go like, okay, you go a little bit stiffer. It's like you can't go too much farther. You can't go too much softer. So I used rebound to kind of control sort of position, because suspension is ultimately position sensitive. So I was using rebound to figure out, okay, where do I want to start moving from in a way. Like we talk about track toughness a lot. Like that's great on the gas and the Yamaha, maybe a little less on the KTM. The Honda, the prior generation chassis, I would say was not good for that. I feel like the bike had a lot of peak performance. Like when you got it set up right, it was good, but it didn't have a great window track to track. This chassis, I feel like a little bit better for that, but it's still one of the narrower bikes for that. I feel like it's going to be a little bit easier to set up place to place, but it's still, my settings on it aren't going to work everywhere, where that's why like the Yamaha and the gas do so good. It's like, hey, I've got the bike dialed. I go ride 6 different tracks and not touch anything.
Yeah, Honda was one of the only bikes that from Kauai to Paris, everything was different for me. A lot of the bikes were very similar, and a lot of that was trying to get the fork. At times it felt busy at Kauai, maybe because the track is faster, and then at Paris it felt like slow. It felt dead, like it was packing too low in the stroke. So the Honda was the only bike that from the 2 days that I had to switch, I'd say almost everything. Not everything, but more suspension-wise, and I didn't feel that with a lot of the bikes. They were pretty similar.
Thank you for joining us for another roundtable. Like I said at the beginning, there is multiple of these, one for every single motorcycle, whichever one you've just watched. If you want to learn about the next most interesting bike, make sure you hit our video playlist, look around. There's plenty of them in there. If you want to check out our full detailed article, dyno charts, weights, all the stuff you want to read through, that's on our site at vitalmx.com. The link is in the bio below. And once again, if you like what we do here, please subscribe, hit like. It really helps us, and we get to keep cranking out great content like this.